Hi Year 12, I hope that you are well. Today's lesson we are going to focus on the control of variables in psychological research. For this particular lesson you need to be focused on pages 180 to 181. And to start off with, I would like you to have a look at the key terms on that particular spread and transfer the definitions of those key terms to your research methods workbook glossary. A variable in psychology is just something that varies, and this is the same for any science-based subject of which psychology is considered to be a science. We already know the difference between a dependent variable and an independent variable, but just to refresh your memory, a dependent variable is the variable that you measure in your study, whereas an independent variable is the variable that you manipulate, you change, and you're changing it in order to see what effect it has on the dependent variable. You're oftentimes looking for a causal relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable in an experiment. Extraneous and confounding variables are variables that I want to introduce to you today. And it's important that you recognize that extraneous variables are variables that might interfere with the dependent variable in a particular study. They're often known as uncontrolled or nuisance variables. A confounding variable is a variable which has definitely interfered with the dependent variable and has confounded, in other words, it's changed, it's influenced the result. Confounding variables can be participant or situational variables, and we'll come to that soon. Extraneous variables are kind of the umbrella term for all variables that have the potential to interfere with a particular study. This diagram on the screen really provides a clear illustration of how an extraneous variable or confounding variable can influence the independent variable, which has an impact on the dependent variable. So I used an example before in one of the previous lessons, which is if you're comparing two groups and perhaps you're interested in finding out whether noise impacts one's ability to learn and recall a list of words, and you've got two groups. One group is in a noisy condition, another group is in a silent condition. It might just so happen that actually one of those groups has a lot of people who have an incredible genius-like proficiency in terms of memory. And that would be a confounding variable because that is something that will definitely impact your results. The alternative might be that in both of those conditions, perhaps in the noisy condition, you've decided that you're going to play loud rock music. And there might be people who, unfortunately, they're not affected by loud rock music, and therefore it has no impact in terms of affecting their memory in the way that you would hope it to as a researcher. That would be an example, again, of a confounding variable. And then an example of an extraneous variable, so this is a variable that might affect the dependent variable. It might be that you've given students a test to take, and unfortunately there's drilling noise in the background. And I'm sorry that I keep on using noise as an example, but I think it's something that works. There might be drilling noise in the background, and that drilling noise might affect their performance on the test. It's not definite, it's not certain that it will affect their performance, but it might. So have a look at the information in the red box, distinguishing between extraneous and confounding variables. Extraneous variables is any variable that has the potential to influence the dependent variable in an experiment and bias the results. Confounding variable, a variable that does have an unwanted effect on the dependent variable in an experiment. The results become biased as it cannot be determined whether results are caused by the independent variable or confounding variable. So extraneous variables and confounding variables can be at a situational level or a participant level. And the examples that I gave before do illustrate this. So situational variables, these stem from the aspects of the environment where the study is conducted. These are things like noise, the light, the temperature, the time of day, the way instructions are given. The point is each of these can have a distorting effect on your data and need to be controlled as much as possible. Whereas participant variables, these stem from the ways in which participants may differ from each other. These are things like differences in IQ, reading ability, having dyslexia, being tired, gender, and age. And the common thread here is that these are variables, these are qualities that are found in the participant. So you can see how for me it's very easy to remember participant variables and really link it to confounding variables, because these are variables that are found in the participant. And the point is for participant variables that each of these can have a distorting effect on your data and need to be controlled as much as possible. And while, for example, if you've got a participant who has dyslexia, you can't take the dyslexia away from them for the purposes of your study. But what you can do is you can make note of it and account for it when you are analysing your results. Now, at this point of the lesson, I want you to go back to show my homework, and I need you to complete a quiz which has these 7 statements and requires you to identify whether or not this statement is alluding to the existence of a participant variable or a situational variable. And if you're not too sure, literally just rewind back and have a listen to my explanation about the differences between the situational variables and participant variables that we can categorize confounding variables and extraneous variables as. There's a lot of variables here, there's even more to come, but it will make sense. So have a go at doing that quiz, and there's literally only 7 statements on that. Okay, as part of furthering our understanding on extraneous and confounding variables, we're going to read this scenario and we are going to identify potential extraneous and confounding variables together. For this, I'm going to pull up a highlighter. Hopefully this works. Lovely. Okay, so an experimenter wishes to investigate the effect of caffeine on the amount of sleep that one gets. We're going to stop there. The effect of caffeine on the amount of sleep. Caffeine here is our independent variable, and the amount of sleep is our dependent variable. She decides to have 20 participants involved in the study. She informs the participants that they will each have to spend 2 nights in a sleep laboratory in Monash University. Their brain activity will be measured so that she can monitor how long they sleep for. She also informs them that they will be given a drink at 9:30 p.m. each night. One night the drink will have caffeine in it, and the other night the drink will not have any caffeine. The participant will not know when they are to receive the caffeinated drink, and not all participants will receive the drinks in the same order. So we think about potential extraneous or confounding variables. Well, think about extraneous variables first. Extraneous variables are variables that might have an effect on the dependent variable, which is the amount of sleep. And it could be that whilst they are staying in this sleep laboratory, there could be things such as, oh, the pillow's not hard enough, or the pillow's not soft enough. It could be that the mattress is uncomfortable. It could be that there's a humming noise that is distracting. So those are what we would consider to be extraneous variables, and they are very much situational variables. And then think about confounding variables. These are variables that have to be found within the participant. And in this particular situation, you've got the influence of caffeine on their levels of sleep. Now, you might have people, and there's lots of teachers who drink coffee. I don't drink coffee, by the way, guys. I'm a herbal tea person. But there might be people who are intolerant to the effects of caffeine because they've had it for so long. And it might be that the researcher hasn't considered the fact that they might have participants who are unaffected by caffeine. Therefore, the results are certainly going to be affected by the fact that they're not affected by caffeine, if that makes sense. You might have also participants who have never drunk coffee before, and the effects of caffeine are so strong that perhaps their results are somewhat anomalies, or they're somewhat an outlier. So these are things that will need to be considered for. And then also you have to think about the person's diet. You have to think about perhaps their level of activity and how that might influence the amount of sleep that they get. So you can see that there are a range of confounding variables. These are participant variables that may impact the study. And I hope this particular scenario makes it clearer in terms of the difference between extraneous variables and confounding variables. Now, there are a number of effects of extraneous variables, and of course, as psychologists, we are solution driven, so we have to make suggestions of how to control them. Extraneous variables can lead to random or constant errors. Random errors are caused by extraneous variables which are unpredictable and unsystematic, so they're random. It is difficult to eliminate. Let's go back. It is difficult to eliminate all random errors, but these are not as serious as constant errors as they are balanced out across conditions. Constant errors are caused by extraneous variables which vary from condition to condition and therefore affect one condition more than the other. Constant errors need to be eliminated, otherwise they reduce the internal validity of the study. And just before we move on, so just to differentiate between constant errors and random errors. Random errors are things that happen in your study that you ultimately had no idea about. You had no expectation that such a thing would occur. So it might be that you have a silent condition for which you are conducting an experiment on memory, and all of a sudden the fire alarm goes off. That is a random error. Yeah. A constant error could be one whereby you're in a psychology classroom, you're giving students a test on psychology, and there are lots of posters on the wall which give them hints about the test. If you don't control for that, that would be deemed a constant error. So if every single condition still had the posters on the wall, you haven't removed it, that would be a constant error because it's something that you could have controlled for, it's something that you could have eliminated. And then how we control extraneous and confounding variables? Well, we ensure that our procedures are standardized so that all participants get the same experience. We use standardized instructions and read these out or give them to participants to read. And that's really ensuring that in terms of the participant variables, you're going to mediate those, and also situational variables, because sometimes the way the researcher reads out the instructions can have an impact on the dependent variable. Counterbalancing of order. So we're going to get into this when we talk about experimental design, but counterbalancing is essentially saying that if you have an experiment whereby you have two groups, one group does a test in the morning and another group does a test in the afternoon. Counterbalancing means that order, so let's say group A did it in the morning, the next time they do the test, they're going to do it in the afternoon. Group B did it in the afternoon. The next time they do the test, they're going to do it in the morning. And that way you're counterbalancing, you're eliminating the effects that time of day may have on the outcomes of the study. But again, like I said, we're going to revisit this in detail. Change of the experimental design. So this is with respect to what I just mentioned. Random allocation of groups. So in order to ensure that you have a fair distribution of participants and not one group has a super high ability quality of participants, you can use random sampling, which is again another thing that we'll come across when we look at sampling techniques in research methods. Measure relevant variables prior to the study and balance these across the group. So if you are conducting a study on memory and recall, it's important that perhaps you get your participants to perform a basic memory test and you can see their general ability. And if you've got participants who are super able when it comes to memory, then what you might do is you spread those participants evenly between the two groups. And what you're doing there is you're ensuring that one group doesn't have a super advantage over the other group. Use a single or a double-blind design. And that particular way of controlling extraneous or confounding variables was actually detailed in the scenario that we looked at before. A double-blind design is where neither the researcher nor the participant knows what condition they are in. A single blind design is where the participant doesn't know what condition they are in. And this is really good because it can eliminate demand characteristics and it also can eliminate investigator bias. Again, we're going to come a little bit more deeper into those terms as we move through research methods. And then finally, you can use a larger sample to spread out the unique characteristics that may be found in participants. So please make sure that you note these down, because I've seen some really cheeky exam questions from AQA where they present you with a scenario and they ask you to provide a solution for controlling this extraneous variable. And you've got a range of solutions here that you can draw upon. When it comes to validity, validity refers to whether a measure actually measures what it claims to be measuring. There are so many types of validity which fall under internal and external validity, and that's how we separate out the different types of validity that we come across in psychology and in science in general. Internal validity is a measure of whether results obtained are solely affected by changes in the variable being manipulated, i.e. the independent variable, in a cause and effect relationship. Two key types of internal validity are construct validity and concurrent validity. Construct validity is literally assessing whether a measure successfully measures the concept it's supposed to. So for example, if you've got a questionnaire that says that it measures IQ, is it actually measuring IQ or is it measuring something different? Another example could be that you're provided with a questionnaire that says that it's measuring personality, but they're asking you about something random like, I don't know, the length of your toenails. That means that it's low in construct validity because the actual measure is not measuring what it intends to measure. So the personality test is not measuring personality test, it's measuring the length of your toenails. Sorry about the toenail example. And then concurrent validity asks whether a measure is in agreement with pre-existing measures that are validated to test for the same or a very similar concept. So for example, if I give you an AQA psychology exam, and in that AQA psychology exam, you get an A grade. If I give you an OCR psychology exam, I expect you to get an A grade because both of these claim to be measuring the attainment of A-level psychology students. If you got an A grade in the AQA psychology exam, but then you get a D grade in the OCR psychology exam, we would say that one of these measures would be low in concurrent validity because the two measures don't concur, they don't correlate. Yes, I hope that example makes sense to you all. Internal validity can be assessed based on whether extraneous variables that could also affect results are successfully controlled or eliminated. The greater the control of such variables, the greater the confidence that a cause and effect relevant to the construct being investigated can be found. External validity is a measure of whether data can be generalized to other situations outside of the research environment they were originally gathered in. And there are two key types of external validity. The first type is one that I know that you guys know through and through because we always use it, which is temporal validity. And temporal validity is also known as historical validity, and I believe the textbook refers to it as historical validity. And this is high when research findings successfully apply across time and perhaps where a particular research has been done very close to the present day. So research that has been conducted in 2019, we would say that it's high in temporal validity. Research that was conducted in the 1960s, we may argue that it's low in temporal validity. And then for ecological validity is whether data is generalizable to the real world based on the conditions research is conducted under and procedures involved. And blanket statements that I come across as a teacher where students have said, oh yeah, this study is low in ecological validity, full stop, no expansion. Those statements, they get on my nerves, guys. They get on my nerves because you need to provide an explanation. So what? If it's low in ecological validity, give me the evidence and give me the explanation. So I'll give you a good example as you guys are covering memory with Miss Smith. The study by Loftus and Palmer, which is the car crash study, it would be argued that actually watching a video of a car crash is not the same as witnessing a car crash in real life. And therefore, Loftus and Palmer's study of the car crash experiment, which is to test eyewitness testimony, is low in ecological validity because of the methods used. Yeah, so you can see the justification there comes from the evidence. Another example, and again, memory is wonderful for presenting examples of studies that are low in ecological validity. Another example would be if you give someone a list of nonsense syllables to remember. So if I give you a list of syllables such as or list of letters to remember, such as X, Z, M, and then I follow it by B, U, X. If I give you those lists to remember, the argument is that those lists don't carry any meaning, and therefore it's low in ecological validity because it does not in any way reflect real life. And then finally, we could also say that studies are low in ecological validity because of where they are conducted. So if a study is conducted in a very controlled, contrived setting, such as a lab, or in a room that is reflective of lab-like qualities, we might argue that the study does not reflect real-world environments, real-world scenarios, and therefore it is low in ecological validity. I'm hoping by now that you've gotten the point. The external validity of an experiment can be assessed and improved by replicating a study at different times and places and obtaining similar results. For example, confidence in the generalizability and in turn external validity of results is increased when research is successfully replicated across different cultures. And again, you can follow the example of certain memory experiments. It could be that you get a real world study whereby you get people who have previously witnessed car crashes and you ask them questions as a follow-up to test their eyewitness testimony. It could be that as opposed to giving people nonsense syllables to remember, you give them meaningful syllables to remember. Okay, and that is the end of the lesson on the control of variables in psychological research. Please make sure that your notes are thorough. If you have any questions, send them over via Show My Homework or via email. And the following lesson will be looking at the textbook and we'll have a go at some of the apply your knowledge questions. I will also give you an exam question to practice and apply your super knowledge on the control of variables. Well done for keeping up.